Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as the war in Gaza progresses, it's always important to remember that 76 days ago to date, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 individuals, mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 245 people, including elderly, men and women, children, as well as infants. 129 of them remain in captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you update us on the latest?
So fighting goes on both in Gaza and along the Lebanese border. Perhaps today the Lebanese border is even more of a focal point than Gaza, with anti-tank guided munitions being launched at Israeli outposts and civilian settlements. And there are indications that a new hostage deal is in the making. The Palestinian movements, Palestinian factions have put out a statement making the cessation of hostilities of the Israeli advance in Gaza a condition for the ceasefire, for the hostage deal. But this can be worked out because it will be simultaneous. However, let me point out some worrying signs. The Israeli leadership, both civilian and military, is increasingly worried because of some accidents and incidents of lack of discipline among the troops. There are force-on-force friendly fire fatalities, more than any military force should have to tolerate. And it turns out that the 3 hostages who were accidentally killed, this could have been avoided had there been more discipline in the ranks. In addition to that, regrettably, while so many Israeli captives are at the mercy of their cruel Hamas captors, it turns out that a security prisoner, a Palestinian one, was killed after fighting with 19 Israeli prison guards, and there is an investigation going. So all of these incidents, of course, would be investigated, but more discipline and more control are apparently needed as the war goes on, and it's more than 2.5 months long already.
Thank you, Mr. Oren. I have a question, though, since the last report that came out of Gaza is that Hamas is not willing to negotiate anymore and is taking down, or at least off the table, any negotiations for the release of any hostages at this point in time. Is this a farce, or what is exactly behind this?
Well, one should go back to the original reason for why they made such an effort to capture, to abduct Israeli soldiers and civilians. Obviously, they had no idea that they would get so many. So originally, they probably had in mind both a prisoner deal, because they were committed to their friends who remained in jail after Yahya Sinwar and others were released in an earlier deal. They probably wanted to put the hostages in the tunnels so that the obvious Israeli counter-attack would find an obstacle. And perhaps down the road, they believed that these hostages would make for an insurance policy for the leadership. Now, it's not the same order of priority. Now, what they want to have is, first of all, a ceasefire. What Israel is going to give Hamas in return for the deal is not necessarily the prisoner release. This is secondary, but a ceasefire and later on obviously the leaders are going to envelop themselves with some of the hostages in order to get this human um, insurance policy. So what you just recounted is part of the negotiations. Of course, saying we won't negotiate until and unless X or Y is part of the negotiations. Everything has a price.
Well, there's one point that I would like also to mention about what you mentioned earlier regarding the discipline or whatnot among the IDF troops. I think that when we're talking about battle discipline, we need to be very, very careful how we phrase this because there is discipline in the ranks. They have discipline with their commanders. They're disciplined, and unfortunately, mistakes occur. There is time and again instances of friendly fire and others that come out. Of course, I understand that. Nevertheless, we need also to take something into account. And the fact of the matter is, the more those units train in times of peace, the more they're well prepared and avoid those kind of situations in times of war. And I must say, I've been quite critical in the past, and I know that other people also within the defense establishment as well as in the government have been quite critical about the fact that the IDF has not trained enough before this war, or at least parts of the IDF, excluding, of course, the Commandos Brigade and the paratroopers who partook in Juniper Oak, which was a very robust training together with their American counterparts. But when we're going down into the details, there were a lot of exercises that were put off for budgetary reasons, also because of the COVID period and other considerations. But these decisions back then were faulty decisions due to monetary considerations, which are costing us lives today. And that is something that I think is very important to highlight. Let's now turn to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like to ask you particularly, there have been a lot of salvos, not only today, but in the last 48 hours, emanating out of the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip, as well as from Lebanon. What can you tell us about that? And if you may also expand on the latest developments in Gaza proper.
Yes, indeed, Jonathan. But before, I would also like to share my view on the comment that was made by Amir. I completely disagree that we have a problem with discipline around the Israeli IDF soldiers. This is completely not the situation. There were some discipline issue, and the IDF, we have to say, in a very unique way, decided to come with it to the out in the open, discussed it very openly. This is something that militaries doesn't do so much, but we did it for sure. But there is not an issue of discipline. I really don't understand from where it is coming. I would like to highlight that the way that the IDF is fighting the cooperation between the ground forces, the air forces, the naval forces, is quite significant. So of course there are issues. It's a war. When you fight during the war, there is all the time some issues that you need to discuss them, to debrief them, to do continuously lesson learned. This is something that is being done, but I really don't know how do we get to the point that there is a discipline issue in the IDF. This I completely disagree with it. Now going back to the barrage that was sent toward Israel, shot toward Israel today. Indeed, it was quite a significant one. We have to say that although if we are looking on the weekly statistics, still the numbers are getting low and low. But today we had a salvo of 30 rockets coming from the Gaza Strip toward the Tel Aviv area on the center of Israel. And first we have to say that the vast majority of them were intercepted. There was even not one that penetrated the defense of the Iron Dome and the air defense warriors that operates them. But still there are, of course, some debris that we saw in the ground. So from the defensive point of view, of course, this salvo was intercepted. But we have to say that if the Hamas still is able to shoot such a salvo, it just highlight this I would say understanding that the fight is not done yet, and the IDF is continuously saying that we need time, and this is something. This fight will take time, and I would say also to our good friends and to others that if we see the Hamas still shooting 30 rockets, it means that we still have a way to go in the Gaza Strip. Although we know that Israel is in Khan Yunis, in Jabalia, in the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and also in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, but still there is a lot that needs to be done there, and this takes time. And this is the time that the IDF needs. The IDF is determined, for sure. As we said, when we look on the weekly statistics, it's less, but 30 rockets on the same time, this is something significant. Which means that we have what to do over there.
Indeed. Let's now turn to the United Kingdom, where we're joined by the former U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, as well as a senior director at the National Security Council in Washington, and the founding director of the American Center for Levant Studies, namely retired Colonel Joel Rayburn. Thank you for joining us, Colonel. I'd like to ask you initially about a statement made by the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in a press briefing at the State Department yesterday, during which he highlighted, "It's clear that the conflict will move and needs to move to a lower intensity phase, and we expect to see and want to see a shift to more targeted operations with a smaller number of forces that's really focused in on dealing with the leadership of Hamas, the tunnel network, and a few other critical things." And he goes on to speak about his narrative of this point. Nevertheless, it's clear to whom?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't think it's clear. I don't think it's clear actually on the ground, and I don't think it's clear in the rest of Washington D.C. I haven't seen, a tipping point in U.S. policy would come if there was a significant portion of Congress that agreed with that, with the Biden administration approach that Secretary Blinken described in the quote you referred to there. But I don't see any sign of that from Congress. I don't see any pressure coming from Congress in the same direction that the Biden administration is pushing. I think actually what Secretary Blinken is articulating is the method that originated in the Obama administration and is continuing in the Biden administration of trying to regulate crises and regulate conflict and to keep U.S. and allied efforts basically at a level that is just enough not to succeed, just enough not to actually consolidate gains and to really resolve these conflicts. It's a conflict management approach, which assumes that the conflicts are intractable, that even operational crises, even operational campaigns, like the warfare that's going on in the Donbass and Ukraine, that these are intractable, and that the U.S. role and the allied role should be to try to tamp down efforts on both sides of the conflict, so that those conflicts sort of de-escalate to a point that they don't matter geopolitically, or that they don't matter as much geopolitically. Well, that is not the reality of what's happening on the ground in the Middle East. It's certainly not what's happening between Israel and Hamas. And I think it's also detached from the reality that I know exists inside Israel, where there is still 100% support for the IDF prosecuting the military campaign to a successful conclusion. And so I don't think this is I think designed. This is an approach that Secretary Blinken is articulating that's designed to assuage probably domestic U.S. political considerations on his party side. I don't think it has to do with it doesn't have to do with any pressure from Congress or elsewhere in Washington D.C. As I say, I was just there, and Congress is focused on other things at the moment, including our border security issue.
Thank you, Colonel Rayburn. Mr. Owen, I'd like to ask you, about a visit by Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to one of the classic Sal vessels, which is stationed in the Gulf of Eilat. What can you tell us about that? And was there a signal to the Houthis also about preparations by the Navy and Air Force for some sort of command, which he didn't elaborate on?
Yes, but before I do, let me just add to what Joel just said, that the Israeli military is a victim of its own earlier successes, because the expectations built around the world, including in Washington, were for a very swift victory. This was not realistic if one considers the dense urban terrain of Gaza and the tunnels and the hostages. So yes, it is taking much longer than it would have been considered in a war game or on the drawing boards. And therefore, what the administration is signaling is that it is wishing Israel to transition from one method of warfare to another, whether it's suitable for this particular phase in the campaign or not. Now, regarding your question, not only is this a missile boat, which you called classic, it's even more than that. This is the most modern and innovative corvette size missile boat, one of four which Israel had built in a German yard, shipbuilding yard. And the original intention was to protect the gas derricks in the Mediterranean. But it was from the very outset known that should there be a war which would necessitate the Israeli Navy to go far, these SAR 6 boats would be the best suited. So this particular boat traversed the Suez Canal, going south, then a bit north to the port of Eilat. It is, of course, available there, along with other forces. You mentioned Air Force, other perhaps special forces, to go south again and go the 2,000 kilometers, if needed, to the Bab el-Mandeb area, or perhaps for some other action against the Houthis in Yemen, not necessarily where they expect an Israeli action. So Gallant's appearance on the missile boat, his warnings to the Houthis should be registered in Sana'a or Hodeidah or wherever they are, because Israel cannot wait much longer in a defensive mode only.
Indeed. I didn't mean classic, or I think I said classic. I said class 6, digit 6.
Class 6, okay.
Indeed. Sal 6,
you're right.
Which is class 6.
Sal 6.
Anyways, General Gavish, I'd like to hear your perspective on the Red Sea once more, since it is conflagrating. It seems like much rhetoric is coming out, not only of Yemen, but also from the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is also instigating additional instability and attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq as we speak. But I'd like to hear particularly, since also last Saturday we saw 14 drones being launched towards one U.S. vessel and other projectiles being fired at shipping, international shipping, marine vessels that are commercial in essence, and these are being targeted time and again, including today as well as yesterday.
Well, you're right, Jonathan, and when we are looking to this arena, we should go back to the IDF and to Israel strategic decision that was made quite close to the beginning of this war, and I think it is still valid. And this strategy says that Israel is in the attack in the southern part of Israel, in the Gaza Strip, and it is in a containing mode in the northern part of Israel. We call it actively containing in Lebanon, basically against the Hezbollah. So I think this strategy applies also to other arenas. It is not Israeli interest now to start a full-scale war in all the, I would say, with all our enemies in all the directions. And mainly, I think that if we talk about the Bab el-Mandab area, we do see a coalition of forces that is in this area. We have to remember that it is not only Israeli interests that are being damaged in this area. Those are also international, I would say, international assets that are being damaged there, and also other interests, economical interests, mainly of the European country and the continent itself, but not only. So I think that it would be for sure for Israel interest if this area would be taken care of by the coalition. Of course, that Israel is always keep to itself the option, and it can, if it would decide to do it, to go to the offensive. But I would also, would like to say that when you see, we have to say, General Gallant in the past, today is of course, the Ministry of Defense, but he comes from the Navy and he's on a Navy ship. And I think that we have to look on what he was saying also from a leadership point of view, from a point of view of, someone who is close to the Navy and who want, to boost the motivation of the Navy, the naval forces which are there. So I think I would also look on what he was saying from this angle.
Indeed. Well, Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to ask you, since the leader of the Houthis openly threatened the United States that if it would retaliate to any of the attacks by the Houthis against international shipping or the vessels protecting them, including American vessels, it would ensure that it would retaliate in full force and down any of the vessels or destroy any of the vessels in the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb or the Red Sea or elsewhere. And then if you could also correlate that with additional Iranian attacks against U.S. forces in the region, since we saw the attack yesterday morning, CENTCOM announced the attack against the Al-Assad air base, which is, of course, housing U.S. forces in Iraq, and additional attacks that have been conducted in the last 72 hours.
Sure. I saw the remarks by the Houthi leader, and essentially what he's saying is, if you don't allow us to continue attacking international shipping with impunity, then we will attack international shipping with impunity. So the Houthis are already doing what he's threatening to do. They're already attacking international shipping. They're already blocking effectively the Bab el-Mandeb, and they're already attacking U.S. naval vessels. So this is a problem that's been coming for a long time, since 2017, maybe even before, of the failure to deter the Houthis from, or to deter the Iranian regime rather from using the Houthis, because they're an instrument. They're not an independent actor, just as Hezbollah is not an independent actor. To deter the Iranians from using the Houthis to attack this international sea lane, and to basically use Yemen as a strategic outpost of the IRGC, a missile base, and now a base from which to attack the shipping in the Red Sea. We're basically in a new tanker war, and the remedy for it is going to have to be what was done to win the tanker war, which is to impose a cost on the Iranian regime, to impose a severe cost on the Houthis for doing what they're doing, and to get them to back off. Until that's done, the economic pain that's going to be inflicted is going to start getting severe. I've seen some analysis that says each container ship that turns away from the Bab el-Mandeb and goes around Africa, this will add at least a week's sailing for the average ship, and it'll add several $100,000 to the cost of shipping for each container ship. This is going to cause a spike in prices, both in Europe and the United States, also in Asia. And you're going to start seeing inflation and things like that as a result of this, from this measly little militia which the Iranian regime is using to attack the international sea lane. It's also going to cause a great deal of economic pain ultimately for Egypt, because ships aren't going to be going through the Suez Canal, so they're not going to be paying the toll to go through the Suez Canal. Canal revenues are going to plummet. So this has to be treated, I think, as the tanker war.
Not to forget, of course, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which is also severely impacted
Yeah,
by
of course.
this, and the Palestinian
Right.
Authority itself, which ironically is also very much dependent on the port of Eilat and additional Israeli ports in order to receive aspects. And therefore, it is quite clear that this has nothing to do with the Palestinians. Rather, it has to do with the Iranian ambitions for this territory. But if I may, in one or two sentences, can we, at this point in time, consider the various theaters which are seemingly escalating? There is no really successful containment of the various areas other than the fact that it hasn't abruptly turned into a full-scale, all-out war throughout the region. Is the policy of containment still working, or is it starting to falter?
No, it's not working. None of these fronts should be active. There should be a strategic. The United States is a superpower and has the equivalent of a superpower alliance with NATO and with other partners. None of this should be happening. The Iranian regime is a weak power. They're a middle power. They should be easily deterred. There's been no real effort, no will to deter the Iranian regime, not just militarily, but economically and politically, as I've said, dozens of times.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Oren, closing sentence?
Unfortunately, we are 3 days away from Christmas, and American presidents dislike starting new clashes around this season. They want to see Christmas and New Year's Eve come and go without being accused of not being the emissaries of peace on earth. Hopefully, come January 2nd, we will see some new posture even in this area.
Well, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Colonel Rayburn and Mr. Oren, as well as General Gavish, who had to depart abruptly due to his duties. But thank you once again for updating us on the latest. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Following this update at 9 p.m. Jerusalem time, namely GMT plus 2, TV7 Israel News will air our daily supplement. Until then, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.